All right, there we go. So as you can see, this is what our week 2 module looks like in D2L. So as you can see kind of in this activity list, of course, we're getting into chapter 2, sections 2.1 to 2.3. This is where we're talking about data visualization, organization, summarizing. So just again, remember, you still have homework assignments, quizzes, and your chapter 2 exam. I already saw that I received maybe a couple emails requesting password for chapter 2, but if you have not had a chance, please don't forget to send me that email. Try to do that before Friday, so there's no rush on the weekend if I'm unable to get to you, or even Monday morning, if you send me an email, I may not be able to get to you in good enough time. So just to be safe, just request your exam password as soon as you can. So that's what we're kind of working on this week. Again, you've got your reading and viewing assignments. If you want to look at the textbook pages, the class handouts, that's going to be under read. If you want to look at video lectures that I have recorded, that's going to be under view. So just to let you know that, but this is kind of where we're getting into. So one of the first things, of course, you guys are working on, then the initial post was due yesterday, was the discussion on creating your own survey. And this is kind of getting into that initial part of if you were a statistician and you had to collect your data, we're starting out with, oh, okay, so what's my survey going to be about? What am I going to think about? What is important to me that I'm going to collect my information on, and then how would I go about doing that? So, then you're coming up with your questions. I asked you some questions about, how would you select your sample, which sampling technique or which sampling method would you use? What do you think an appropriate sample size would be? And, those kind of things. And then your peer replying to each other's posts is going to be due tomorrow at midnight. So again, your minimum requirement is replying back to at least 2 different posts. But if you want to get a few more, just additional points, then you can obviously participate in more than 2 peer reply posts. So just kind of keep that in mind. And, I get to see incredible ideas that people come up with for these surveys. As I was getting ready this morning, I was listening to the radio, and there's this show that I hear, and they were actually talking about how some people's brains work better at navigation and some don't, kind of like a cognitive skill. And it was just amazing to hear. And, they kind of did self-assessment where they asked people, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your navigational skills? And then they put them through like a scientific test, and they noticed that people actually assess themselves really well. Like, so if somebody says, I would say I have about a 6 or 6.5 in navigation skills, that's what they were seeing on the scientific test also. So it was kind of neat to see how they took something that you do every day, navigating from home to work to grocery store or wherever, and how some people can't do something as regular as going to work without a GPS. And, of course, GPS has changed our lives tremendously. And some people are, I just need to go once and then I remember my way and I'm done. And then, they ask questions about, do you see discrepancies in gender? So, we always kind of, if you ask the men, they'll say we are better at navigation than women. You ask the women, they'll say we're better at navigation than men. And they actually found that it actually more geographic and regional in terms of how men and women will perform. So in cultures where women don't have access to navigation, right? They're not allowed to drive. They're not allowed to kind of be on their own, do on their own. They will have poor navigational skills. But in the West, you will see that men and women are actually more equal in navigation. So just think about, something as simple as how do you get from point A to point B? They did this whole study on it. So that's kind of what, I want you guys to do, is anything that's important to you or you think would be fun, that's kind of what you are doing with these surveys. So that's kind of where that survey discussion post comes from. And then the activity that you are doing for Saturday, or at least it's due on Saturday, is going to be about related to chapter 2, so organizing your data. So I just picked this data set that I have, which talks about US candy production. I've given you a little bit background on, how we're gathering and organizing our data here. So you've got some information at the beginning you can look at. This is the data set that you are working on. So, it's in Google Sheets. You can download this to Excel if that's what you prefer. So just keep in mind, this is sort of the master copy that I have. So you will not be able to work directly in this file. So if you want to work as Google Sheets, just go under File and say make a copy. So if you make a copy, you can just, it will copy to your own drive, and then you can edit it and work around in it. So that will be if you want to keep it as Google Sheets. If you want to download it for Microsoft Excel, then obviously go down to the download option and then click on Microsoft Excel. So whichever program you want to work with, either one of those are fine. If you just want to have a backup copy, you can download it and make a copy. So that's up to you. So that's going to be the original data set on page 1. And then if you look at the second tab on the bottom where it says template, I've kind of created a template of what your data sheet should look like. So, just copy and paste your data over here on the left-hand side for the years that are assigned to you. And then this is the part that you will be doing the calculations for. And then based on that, you have to create your frequency and relative frequency distribution. And then the last thing you guys are doing is, graphing that. So we have the table format, and then we also have the histogram. So that will be the graphical part of it. So that's how this Google Sheets file is set up. And I can see that a couple of you are already in here because I can see that you have accessed it through your D2L course shell. So that's going to be oh, sorry, didn't mean to do that. There we go. Oh, no, looks like I ended up closing it. All right, let's go here. Okay. So, so this is, like I said, based on candy production. And as you can see, it actually goes from 1972 till 2017. Yeah, so it goes from January of 1972 to August of 2017. Oh, I see what this guy is doing. So as you will see, I have assigned you specific years. So based on the number of students that we had, each one of you ended up getting 2 years worth of data. So just be very, very careful when you start working on this project. Please make sure you have the right years that you have copied the data for, because if you do the wrong years, then honestly, I cannot really grade you if you've picked the wrong year. So, just be careful, make sure your calculations are based on the years that were assigned to you and not the incorrect time frame. So if you need to check it 2 times or 3 times, do that, but please be very careful. And, as we would kind of expect around Halloween to Christmas time, you would expect there to be more candy production, right? Because obviously Halloween is more revolving around candy distribution. Christmas also, chocolates and candies are a big part of the gift giving process. So you would expect that candy production to be high, but then, what happens in those other months? So that's kind of interesting to see how that data changes. Obviously, for those of you who have the beginning years, your data is going to look a lot different from those of you who have, kind of in those 2000 time frame, because obviously over time our consumption of candy production has also increased. So even if you just look at the data for those couple of the earlier 1970s and compare them to the later 2000s or even 2010 onwards, you will see a big difference in that candy production. So get your data first, narrow it down to those 2 years that are assigned to you, and then this is where you kind of get into working on the project. So you have to describe, and you talked about do your data variables, are they discrete or continuous in chapter 1? So, go look at those definitions again and then come back and see, well, how would you describe this data over here, and give an explanation of why you went with discrete or continuous. And then we get into designing our frequency distribution. So how many classes should our frequency table have? What would be a good lower limit? What should our class width be? And then based on that, once you start coming up with your initial information, then, we can start working on the frequency and the relative frequency distribution. And then based on that, we'll create our histogram and a relative frequency histogram. So basically you will have two graphs or two histograms, one based on just the frequency calculation and one based on the relative frequency calculation. So just be mindful that you should have two different graphs with this. As far as the frequency distribution and relative frequency distribution go, if you look at the template, you will see I've actually included both of those columns right here in this table on the right-hand side. So you don't need to create two separate frequency distributions and relative frequency distribution, but you will obviously have two different graphs because those calculations are going to be slightly different from each other. Once you have created your histogram, your frequency distributions, then you will answer these questions that I have, in the second part here. So what was your lowest frequency and relative frequency? What observations or conclusions can you make based on that? Same thing with highest frequency and highest relative frequency. Again, what conclusions or observations can you make from that? And then do you think you have the appropriate number of classes, or should you have increased them or decreased them? Because, number of classes can make a big difference on how spread out your data is going to be. And, of course, our goal is to try and be as even as possible. We want to make sure we don't have classes with zeros in them. Maybe one class is okay to have a zero, but you don't want more than one class to have zeros because, that kind of skews your data, and it's not going to be a good way to kind of draw conclusions if you're going to have too many zeros in there. So that's those will be some of the things you have to think about. And then what does the shape of your histogram tell you about the shape of your distribution? So all of this information is going to be available in chapter 2. If you haven't had a chance to read the textbook or look at the handouts, I would definitely ask you to take a little bit of time to do that. And then this assignment will also have two parts to it. So, kind of like you did with the M&Ms activity, but you're not doing the experiment on Flipgrid. All you are doing on Flipgrid is answering these questions, the observations you made, what conclusions can you draw? All of those is what you're going to record on Flipgrid as your response. And then this template file that you are looking at, download it, save it, and then this is the file you will be uploading right here through assignments for week 2. So you have to record a video and you have to submit either an Excel or a Google Sheets file. Do not submit PDF files because then I cannot go and see what calculations you used. So leave them in the Excel or Google Sheet format. So just read through the instructions carefully, and then you can see you have the submission option at the bottom. So, just go ahead and submit your file based on that. So as you will see, for the last student here, and I just went by the order in the roster. So Bethany has 2006 to 2007. So I thought just to kind of show you how these process will work for creating your frequency distribution, I'll go ahead and pick the years that are not assigned to you guys, so that way I'm not I guess doing the work for you guys. So anything after 2007 is going to be fine. Oh, come on, buddy. And I think I'm actually going to go to 2010, 2011, just to kind of get into the next decade. So just make sure you are getting your 24 months of data. So go from the January of that year that's assigned to you till the December of the second year. So since I'm going from 2010 to 2011, I start in January of 2010 and I will end in December of 2011. So that's going to be my 2 years or 24 months of data. I'm just going to hit Control C on my keyboard, or you can do, copy from the menu option. And I'm just going to go under template and I'm going to paste it. But before I do that, since this is my master copy, I'm actually just going to make a copy of this. So that way, I'm not messing up with the original file. So I'm going to come to my template and just starting with that second line, I'm going to go ahead and paste my data. So just copy and pasting, and you will see I have January of 2010 to December of 2011. And if you guys want to follow along, because this is just a working file, I'm going to share this link with you. Sorry, I'm going to share this link with you through the chat on Zoom. So if you guys want to join me in this document, you can. So you should see that link coming through the Zoom chat, and just click on it and you can, work with me as we go through this example here. All right, awesome. I'm seeing some of you already starting to come in. That's great. Okay, so let's keep our instructions in front of us so that way, we know exactly the steps we are going through. So I'm going to let you guys decide on the discrete or continuous set of data. I'm not going to, I don't want to influence your answer because I'd like to see what you guys come up with. So let's start with the number of classes question. So if you read your handout or your textbook, you will see that we normally mention you should go anywhere from 5 to 20 classes. And, of course, that is going to depend on how big and how widespread your data is. So if you want to just start with 5 and see what your data looks like, you can do that. And then if you are unsatisfied with the way your data is, and the thing you would be looking for in that case would be, did my grouping get too, that word just escaped my mind, too dense, kind of like, are they too concentrated together, right? Because you do want a little bit of spread. You do want a little bit where you can kind of see what it's going with. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm actually going to start with 7 as my minimum number of classes. And then we can see if 7 works for us or not. And then if we need to go down, we still have room to go down to 6 or 5. And if we need to go up, we can go up. Just from my experience with this data set, I would say stop at 10. Don't go to more than 10 because it may spread out your data too much where you end up having too many zeros in your frequency column. And we don't want that. You may not even need 10, honestly. So it will just depend on how you look at your data. And so that's going to be something you need to decide on. So for now, you will see under the number of classes option, I'm going to say, you know what, I'm going to start out with 7. Based on that, then we will have to calculate our class width. But before we can get to class width, we need to do what is our lowest data value, what is our highest data value, and then based on that, we can calculate our range. So Google Sheets is a little finicky because, in Excel, you have the option where you can go to your column and you can say, I want to sort it from A to Z, or it may say, ascending or descending order. So if I do A to Z, did you see how it completely messed up my entire page over here? So unfortunately, Google Sheets does that. Excel will just sort the column for you, but Google Sheets doesn't do that. So to kind of save that heartache of, having to rearrange the entire page, I'm actually just going to copy my industrial production column. And I'm just going to open up a new sheet, just open up a blank sheet in Google Sheets and paste just that column here. And then I'll do sort because there's nothing else on this page. So I don't care if it rearranges the whole page because I just want to see what is my smallest and what is my largest number over here, right? So just open a new sheet and then you can delete it when you're done working with this. So you can see we can just go ahead and rearrange that entire column, and you will see my smallest data value or the lowest data value is 89. So I'm actually going to put that over here, 89. And then for my highest one, you know, just come back to that blank sheet and go to that bottom, and you can see my largest number is 126. So that's going to be our highest data value. So, you know, instead of going through the whole list and trying to see which is the smallest number and not, use the technology to help you out, make your life easier. So sort that column. Does anybody know how to calculate range?
Don't you just take the highest minus the lowest?
Yeah, very good. It's really that simple. Take the highest data value and subtract the lowest one. And here again, guys, use Excel or Google to help you out. So I'm going to just hit equal to in that range box. And honestly, I'm just going to click on the cell for the highest data value, minus sign from my keyboard, and then click on the cell with my lowest data value. You know, why bother doing the calculation when Excel or Google will do that for us? Obviously, you can use, you know, a handheld calculator if you wanted to do, but, you know, obviously, as you know, Excel and Google Sheets will do the calculations for you, so you can use those. All right, so we've got our range. We decided on 7 for now as our number of classes, and that's actually the two numbers you need to calculate your class width. So the class width tells us, you know, because we will be breaking these frequency distributions down into like a lower class limit and an upper class limit. So I am so sorry. We are getting spam calls all morning today. And the reason I actually leave my cell phone turned on, which is not a normal practice for me, is if my mom's nurses called for some reason, I need to be able to get to them. So I'm really sorry, guys, that it keeps ringing with these out of state spam calls. So your class width will basically tell you how wide each of your classes need to be for the frequency distribution. So take your range and divide it by the number of classes. So that's how you calculate your class width. So I'm actually, again, going to let Excel or Google do the calculations for me. So I'm going to click on the box where I have the range and divide by the box or cell, I guess, where you have the number of classes. So it's basically 37 divided by 7, and looks like I messed up my function here. So equal to the cell with the range divided by the cell with the number of classes. And you can see it's coming out to be 5.2857 and so on. You will see next to it, I say round up, and that's actually a calculation you always do when you're coming up with your class width. Because, you know, normally if you think about rounding rules, we say if it's 0.5 or more, you round up. If it's 0.4 or less, you round down. So that's not the rounding rule you use with class width. With class width, even if you have 5.0001, because you have a remaining decimal after that number, you always have to round up. So just be careful. So since I have 5.2 blah, 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 it's actually going to round up to 6. Okay, so you've actually done the big part of your frequency distribution here, because this is the most crucial part that we're going to come up with. Now, the second crucial part to your frequency distribution is actually going to be actually completing your table and seeing, are we ending up with too many zeros in our frequency column? So for that, you will actually come to your table over here and now start designing this frequency distribution. So one rule of thumb that I tell you guys to remember, and you'll see this in your notes and handout also, always make sure that the way you come up with those classes for your frequency distribution, you have to make sure you're including the lowest data value and you are including the highest data value. You don't want those numbers left out of your table. So just make sure when you're designing those classes, it will include 89 in there and it will include 126 in there. So the best way to do when you're starting out with that first class limit and you're doing the lower one, just use 89 as your starting point, because you know 89 is the smallest number we have in our entire data set. So if I start with 89, I know I'm going to include it by default no matter what. So I just use 89 as my starting point. Some textbooks you will see they might ask you to go down to 88 as a starting point, kind of like just one number down, and you can do that also. But I have always had luck with just starting at the lowest number as my starting point. Now, once you have that limit taken care of, this is where your class width will come into play. And the class width is actually going to help you find what the next class's lower limit is going to be. So this is where you take that number 89 and you add the class width we came up with, and it's going to be the rounded up number. So I'm going to take 89 and I'm going to add 6 to it. And again, guys, you will see I'm just clicking on my cells instead of actually typing numbers. And the reason why I do that is because, you know, if I had to go back and change the number of classes, then by using the cells, my formula is already in there and I won't have to go back and redo the calculation. Excel will automatically do the math for me. Now, since my number 6 is going to stay the same, and if you guys are comfortable with Excel, you know, I'll show you a little shortcut for that. If not, you can just go click on the next cell, click on 95, or the cell where you have 95, and then click on 6 again, and it will create the next value for you. The other thing that you can do is in that second cell where we came up with 95, because my cell where I have that number 6 is never going to change, I'm always going to be adding 6 to my class width. You can actually put dollar symbols around those numbers and, you know, around the cell value. So dollar before the E and dollar before the 7. So in this case, what I can do is then click on that cell again with 95, take my mouse to the bottom right corner, and you will see how your mouse icon changes to this little plus sign. And if I pull it down, you will see it's actually going to calculate all the next class widths for me. So you will see what's happening is it's using the previous cell in the table, but that number 6 cell, the E7, will stay the same. I can go down over here and you will see I'm still using that same E cell. So when you want to keep a cell constant, you put dollar numbers in. Obviously, the other shortcut would be instead of using the cell over here, you can just say, you know what, I'm just going to keep adding 6. But in this case, the only issue is going to be if that class width changes when you change the number of classes, you will have to come back and change the 6 to whatever your new class width would be. So that's kind of why I prefer using the cell with the dollar symbols on it. So if this number was to change, your calculation would change. And let me just show you what I mean by that. So let's say, you know, we changed our number of classes and I'm just going to go down to 5. Well, you can see my class width is 7.4, which means this number will now actually become 8. So as soon as I hit enter, look at the table under the class limits on the right side, and you will see all those numbers are going to change. So you see how everything changed when my class width changed to an 8, and I then have to go back and recalculate this. So that's kind of why I like using those dollar symbols in there. So I'm going to go back to 7 for now because that's what we had. So this guy should be 6, and I'm back to my original. Just make sure, since we only did 7 classes, that you have 7 classes over here. So that will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I actually don't need these last 2. I'm going to leave this number here for now. Even though we don't need this as part of our class, we will need it to calculate this upper limit over here. Any questions on coming up with those lower class limits for all 7 of our classes right now? So we did the lowest data value, highest data value. Based on that, we calculated the range just by subtracting those 2 numbers. Number of classes is something you decide, right? There's no calculation or math for that. That's based on just what you think would be a good starting point. Then divide the range by number of classes to come up with your class width. For the lower class limit, for the very first one, just use the same data value you have for the lowest one and use that as your starting point, and then add the width to all the other lower class limits. Now, for the upper class limit for each one of our classes, since this guy is starting at 95 for the second one, this one has to end at a number before that. And the reason we do that is, since this guy starts at 95, my first class has to end at 94. And the reason for that is if in your data set, you do actually have the number 95, well, if you have 95 ending here and 95 starting over here, well, then where do you put 95? Under which class do we include 95? Does it go in the first one or the second one? So to actually avoid that confusion, that's why we do not do overlaps between the upper limit for the previous class and the lower limit of the next class. That's why you go a number before. If this was in decimals, let's say you had one decimal place. So let's say if you started at 95.5, well, then this guy would have ended up at 95.4. So, with decimal, you would go one decimal place before. So that's kind of how this works. So as you can imagine, since this guy is at 101, this one has to stop at 100. So that's kind of how you go backwards. So 107, this would be 106, 113, so 112, 119, this guy would be 118, 125 would be 124. And that's why you will see I kept that 131 for now, because that tells me my upper class limit has to be 130. And once you do that, get rid of the 131. We don't need it anymore. And you can see we have our 7 classes and we are good to go. Once you come up with these classes for your frequency distribution, now you can go back to the rearranged data set that we have over here and count how many data values fall under this category. So if you go from 89 to 94, well, let's see, 89 to 94 would be all of these numbers over here. And, since I started in that very first cell, you can obviously see I have 9 of these in my first class. So, and I'm just going to put it in bold so that way I know I've already counted these numbers. So that's going to be 9 of these. So that tells us we have 9 data sets in our first class. Does that make sense? So any number that goes from 89 to 94 will be counted in the first class. Then our next class is going from 95 to 100. So I don't have 95, but I start with 96 and I go from 96 to 100. And as you can see, that's coming out to be a total of 5 points or 5 data values in that range. So that's going to be 5 over here. And that's basically how you're completing all of these, right? So 101 to 106. So 101 to 106. And you can see the only 2 numbers that fall in that range are going to be the repetition of 103, 103. So that's going to be, that's going to be a total of 2 in that category. 107 to 112. So there we go, 107 to 112. Wow, okay, so only 1 number, right? 107 to 112 is only 1. Now we're going from 113 to 118, 113 to 118. So those would be these numbers here. And again, it looks like that's a frequency of 5. So 5 data values there, 119 to 124. Again, it looks like you only have 1 number in there. So 119 to 124 is just 1. And as you can see, even for the last one, you are going from 125 to 130. And obviously the only value there is 126. So that's going to be a value of 1. if you calculate your frequency column correctly, go ahead and add that column. And remember, you have the built-in function called sum, which ends up adding, the column or row or, whatever you're trying to add. So I click on sum, and then I'm actually going to just use my mouse to select from the first class to the last one and add up that frequency column, close my parentheses. And you can see we did 2 years of data, which means 24 months of data. And you can see my frequency column is adding up to 24. If you think, I've got 3 classes with ones in there and that seems too scanty, you can change your number of classes to 6 and rearrange your data. So you can do, this is spread out a bit too much. Maybe I want to consolidate it a little. You can bring down your number of classes. You can go 6, you can go 5. If you think your classes are too heavy, so you have like 7, 8 in all of them, and you're like, okay, they are too dense. Maybe I want to spread them out a little, then increase your number of classes. But that's kind of, where you have to decide how many classes you think are appropriate, and do you need to change that. Now, once you have calculated your frequency distribution, these 2 columns together is what we call as your frequency distribution. So that's honestly all there is to creating a frequency distribution. If you ignore the frequency distribution column, and if you look at the class limits and the relative frequency column, well, that's your relative frequency distribution. That's your table. So it's really that simple. And keep in mind, relative frequency honestly is the same calculation as you would do if you were trying to find a percentage. The only difference is with relative frequency, we leave them as decimals. With the percentage, we convert them to a percent by multiplying with 100. So in relative frequency, just leave them as decimals. And the way you calculate your relative frequency is, again, you actually need the frequency column for that. So I'm just going to use Google Sheets to do the calculation for me. Click on the frequency for the first class, because that's what we're trying to find the relative frequency for, and then divide by the total number of frequencies you have, which will be the total of your frequency column. So literally you are doing 9 divided by 24 to find the relative frequency for that first class that goes from 89 to 94. And you can see that's what my answer will come out to be. Same thing for the second relative frequency. So I will take 5, which is the frequency for that, and divide it by the total of 24. And that's going to be, the math you do. So again, if you wanted to let Google Sheets or Excel do the math for you, since that denominator of 24 is going to stay the same for all of my relative frequency, like I showed you before, for that denominator, you can again put dollar symbols around the J and number 13. So that box of 24 will always stay the same. And then just again, take your mouse to that bottom right corner of the cell, pull it down till you get to the very last class, and you will see it ends up calculating all the relative frequencies for us. So you will see 5 divided by 24. For this one here, you will see it's 1 divided by 24. Obviously the same thing for that last one. It's 1 divided by 24. If you go ahead and add the relative frequency column, because this is your entire data set, your relative frequency should add up to 1, or if it's rounding, it should be as close to 1 as possible. So either 0.999999999, or sometimes it can be like 1.00001, but anywhere where it is very, very close to 1. And as you can see, since I've kind of left my decimals as repeating or non-terminating, it's adding up to 1. And I don't know, did I mention how far you can round these here? Okay, so I'm actually asking you to round your answers to the nearest 10th. So we can go ahead and do that, round these. And you actually have these little decimal places to increase or decrease them. You can use that, or you can use formatting, but we're rounding it to just the nearest tenth, which is, obviously the first decimal place. So you can round it like this, but I actually don't like the fact that you have zeros for those 1 divided by 24. So I'm going to actually see if I change it to 2 decimal places, will that be an answer better than 0? And yeah, you can see it comes out to be 0.04. So, if that is the situation you end up in, then go with 2 decimal places. And just make a note that 1 decimal place was giving you zeros, and that's why you changed it to 2. So, just so we're not looking at a whole bunch of zeros in there, but that's your relative frequency. So just taking the frequency for each class, dividing by that total of the frequency column, and you end up getting your relative frequency. So questions on that part, guys? So, like I said, the biggest part of this is coming up with the number of classes, finding out what your range is, and then looking at the class width to start by designing those classes. And then honestly, if you get too many classes that have 0 frequency, and I'm not talking about relative frequency, if you have even 2 classes with zeros in it, redo the frequency distribution, because 1 class with 0 is acceptable, but 2 is not going to give you accurate data. So decrease it, increase your classes to try and see what will work the best for you. And then just to show you very quickly, this will need a little bit of tweaking, but you can go under chart to try and come up with a graph. And this is by default showing a line graph. And you know what, I'm actually going to delete this. So if you see on the right hand side, they have this little insert chart option over here. And if you don't recognize that, just go under the insert menu option right here on the top left, go under insert, and then just go under chart from there also. So either one of those will work. And then, of course, you will have to kind of fix it. So we are looking more for a histogram or a column. And I'm trying to see. There we go. There's your histogram. And you may have to customize it a little bit. So you can go under the customizing, if you want to change colors, border, that kind of thing. Here's your histogram. Obviously, you want to change your title. If it's not correct, the label on your horizontal and vertical axis, you will kind of need to play around with some of those. And in your D2L course shell, if you go under, and I think I showed you this to you guys last time, but if you go under course information, and I keep forgetting that I'm in teacher mode. But if you go under course information, just scroll to the bottom of this screen. And you will see where I have technology resources. It talks about how to create a histogram in Excel if you're using Excel to work with this, or how to create charts and graphs in Google Sheets. So I have tried to include a couple of these links. Of course, you can always go to just Google and do a search on, how to create or how to customize a graph or a histogram in Excel, Google. You can do that. But I kind of thought these had, good introductory steps to it. So you can kind of look through these examples if you wanted, but this will need a modification because this is, just the rough graph over here. So this is not the final graph, but this is just to kind of show you where you can at least get that starting point. And you will remember need 2 graphs because you're doing one with the frequency column and one with the relative frequency column. So you should have 2 graphs over here. But, I would say for auto graphing, this is not looking too bad, right? I mean, it does at least have kind of the histogram shape. And you can compare this with your frequency distribution. So I'm just going to move this guy to the top for now so I can kind of have these side by side. So you can see my first class is going from 89 to 94, and you will see we're kind of actually starting at 85. If you need to set your axis, you can always double click on the numbers on the horizontal axis. And you can actually change that data range over here if you wanted to. So if you wanted to select another range, you can kind of do that. So it does have a little bit of that modification that you can do. You can see under customize, you have the horizontal axis. And you can actually see, okay, I want to do my minimum value as 89, which is where my class begins. And my largest was at 130. So you can actually go under customize and go under horizontal axis. You can, I believe you can change the label. Or actually you could change the label from here. And these are not observation dates. Obviously, this is your industrial production over here, actually, which is going to be as a percentage. So that industrial production should actually be on the x-axis. So now you can see, okay, I'm starting out at 89 and I'm ending at 130, but then these intermediate numbers are not where I need them to be. So that might be another thing you kind of have to think about. Oh, okay, so how can I, adjust that? So that would be another customizing thing you may have to be. You can try and see, hey, can I type this in by hand instead of letting Excel or Google Sheets do that for me? But anyway, so the other thing I wanted to point out is you can see our first class has a frequency of 9. And this one right now looks like it's going from, on this side, this should actually be frequency and not industrial production. So then, maybe I want to rearrange my vertical axis. And in this case, you can see our smallest number was 1 and our largest was 9. But if you want to go from 0 to 10, that's fine. You may have to, kind of rearrange some of this. And, maybe I'll start this guy at 0. And I think that looks a lot better. So fix that one and you can see, okay, so for the first column, I'm going from 0 to 9, which is where my frequency is for that first one. The second one is going to 5. And you can see this one is actually going to 6. So again, I need to fix my second column. And that's because, these numbers are not exactly matching where our second one is. So you can see there will be some customization that you are going to have to do so that your histogram will match your frequency distribution. So since you have 7 classes in your frequency distribution, you should have 7 columns in your histogram also. So they have to match, classes to the number of columns. So they have to kind of go hand in hand. So that's kind of how, you're going to have to play around with these histograms a little bit to try and come up with a graph. So, work on this maybe during the week if you can. So that way, if you have questions, you need help, you still have time to ask me, send me an email. But if you start working on it till Friday evening or Saturday, then I might not be available if you run into any trouble. So at least, and you can see the first part just takes a few minutes, maybe half an hour. So that way, even if you have your frequency distribution going, you still have time to play around with the histogram. So that's what you guys are working on. So any questions that are kind of coming up as we went through, this little data set over here?
Well, I had a question. Oh, so we are able to use Excel for this project.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, the only reason I give you the option with Google Sheets is because I know some laptops don't come with the Microsoft Office program in it, and sometimes that can be pricey to purchase. So I don't want you guys to have to purchase the Microsoft Office suite if you don't already have it. So in that case, just remember through Ames, you do have free access to Google Sheets, Google Documents, all the Google software. So that way, if you don't have to purchase Excel, you can just work with Google Sheets. But if you already have Excel on your own computers, then, and you're comfortable with it, go ahead and use Excel. And, the one thing I like is a lot of your functions are parallel. So a lot of these same functions can be used in Excel and can be used in Google Sheets. So you're not having to learn like a whole new function list kind of thing. So yeah, just feel free to use Excel if that's what you guys have and you're comfortable with it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions coming to mind, guys? Alrighty, I do apologize. We've kind of gone over by 4 minutes over here, but if you want to stick around and ask me any questions, please feel free to do that. Good luck with this week's assignments, guys. And again, just as a final reminder, don't forget to request your email, your passwords for your exam. So just shoot me a quick email for that. Have a wonderful day, guys. Be careful. And I look forward to seeing you next week. And I'm actually going to try and grade last week's assignments today and tomorrow. Hope at least start, get started on those. So once I'm done grading, I'll shoot a quick email or send a message to remind.com just to let you know your grades have been posted. All right. Okay, guys, have a wonderful day. Take care. Be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, guys. Feel better, Hillary.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Take care.
Can I ask a question real quick? So, what kind of calculator were we supposed to be buying for this course, or was there something else that we were supposed to be getting to do the, because I read something about like we need a scientific calculator, but not one with graphing on it.
Yeah, so Cody, technically the math department has a policy of scientific calculators, only no graphing, but I am not very particular about that because, if you already have a graphing calculator, I don't want you to go out and buy a scientific one. So, and some students are more comfortable with graphing because that's what most of them have used through like high school and stuff. So if you have one graphing, that's fine, you can use that. And if you don't have one and you are going to buy one, then I would say go get a scientific one, but either one of those will be fine for this class.
Perfect, because yeah, I think that's what we need for the final test.
Yeah, and as you can see, a lot of these, we are actually going to use Google Sheets and Excel for it. So since you already have a built-in calculator and you can do graphs through that, I'm not going to be like upset, like, oh my God, why did you use a graphing one? So just please use whatever you're comfortable with.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, that's it for me. Thanks again.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Hi, Sky.
Hi. Okay. Sorry. For our final exam, do you know if it's going to be at this exact same time?
Yes, because you have the two parts to the final exam. You have the in-class, which is what we do during this time, and then you have the take-home, which is actually going to be the longer version that you will do on your own time at home or wherever you would like to.
Okay, I will let you know that